Hello, my name is Amanda Fowler, and I am the Crisis Team Manager for the Trauma Intervention Program, or TIP, in our area. And this is what we do. It's a volunteer program that works hand in hand with law enforcement and first responders to help community members that are going through immediate crisis. We are called in by these agencies, like directly following a personal tragedy. Initially, I had proposed to report on our monthly continuing education meetings that we hold every third Monday, and they usually last like 3 hours. On advice of my instructor, I decided to hold a special meeting um, for the volunteers that had been with the program for less than 6 months, had only been on one or two calls, and still were a little unclear of some of the procedures that may happen, that maybe veered off of what their previous training had shown them, because as we all know, not everything is, always presents itself as in a neat little package. This meeting that I held was there were 9 members that fit the criterion, and it was held on April 25th, 2019. It started at 6 p.m. and it lasted for about an hour and 45 minutes. And we held it at a centrally located police precinct in their training room. The main focus of this group was to address concerns from the new volunteers, like I said, that maybe the veterans had, by sheer experience, had learned to cope with and learned to deal with. Also, I know that sometimes in our large group meetings, the veteran volunteers have a tendency to take over, and the new recruits tend to feel a little intimidated about sharing. I've had to speak openly to the larger members about the heavy sighing or eye rolling or just outward emotions concerning their possible boredom. That not everybody is as advanced in their skills, and that I request that they maybe instead of being bored or what have you, that they work with the new volunteers to help them get more comfortable. But at any rate, in this specific meeting, we opened the meeting by stating the purpose, that this was a more intimate setting for the discussion of the individual calls, like I said, addressing concerns and procedures in event that they didn't follow the previous training that they had received. At this point, I took the time to recap some business information from the previous meeting, and we executed like a small round where I used the word association, clear or unclear, to establish whether everything was understood up until this point. At this point, I had 2 members that had asked for clarification on a few things, and so I obliged and further clarified. At this point, the floor was open to call sharing, and as per our procedure, I have a co-leader, and between him and myself, we do all of the debriefing after each call where the volunteer, after going to a scene, calls and just discusses their feelings or anything that maybe happened unusual. Um, Often enough, they end up with just calling it a normal call. Although none are really normal because they involve people having a difficult time. But some are a little more routine than others. Um, Now, because, like I said, because he and I have done the debriefings, we knew of some specific concerns that our new volunteers had, um, and some situations that they experienced that might serve as a learning experience for other members, as they weren't, exactly what you would call normal. Now, most of the members were very eager to share, and from this, a free flow of advice and suggestion was held in a was exchanged in a very natural way and in a very orderly fashion. There was really no over talk. They allowed one another to uh, finish their thought or finish the story and then finish the thought before the next member interjected or whatever, and everybody stayed on topic, and the advice and the suggestions were pertinent and relevant to the topic at hand. um, Now, we did have one bit of difficulty. At one point, the conversation did begin to veer off point. Um, One of our volunteers had shared an especially emotional story that had happened on one of her calls, and I think, being that the job that we're in, the overwhelming empathy felt for this volunteer began to um, take over and impede the flow and the purpose of the meeting, which was to offer suggestion. Um, as you may have caught, I did say that most people were willing to share. There was one member that I had to gently prod to share her story. She stated that her hesitation was due to not wanting to burden others, and I took this time. Well, both my co-leader and myself took this time to address that. That actually, by sharing, it helps, well, a little bit of catharsis for the individual, and it also serves as a helpful hint to the rest of the group, and so that she should never feel that she is burdening anyone. That's what we're there to do, is to listen and help her. Um, in fact, the story that she was reluctant to share was the story that I had used as a catalyst for a role playing exercise. And I knew of the prior, I knew prior to the meeting of the situation, and I felt like it would be a good way. I broke the group into pairs and asked them to create a suggestion on how to address a drunken parent on the scene of a teenage suicide that would not allow anyone to remove um, the young man's body. Law enforcement, I know, was having a difficult time. First responders, the members of the funeral home, they were having trouble um, removing the man's son from the house. Um, the suggestions that the volunteers came up with in their role playing were extremely helpful and insightful. They offered suggestions that I hadn't even thought of. So it was very helpful, and I was glad that we were able to use that time to work together and help. Um, Now, in an attempt to end the meeting on a positive note, I requested the volunteers to share humorous events that happened while they were on call, because there were a couple kind of funny, situations that might have otherwise been, even like led to second and third injury, but because you were able to use maybe a little humor, it did, lighten the mood some. Um, Again, at the end, the final act of the evening was another round to summarize what had been learned, and then asking whether each member had felt that their concerns had adequately been addressed, or if there was, any other questions. I feel that the meeting was productive, and stayed for the most part on topic. And even when it did veer off some, it was relatively easy to get it back on track. I feel like that with our reluctant member, uh, that we did in fact show her that there was a purpose for what we were doing, and that it was for the well-being of all, to include individual. Um, I received a general feeling in the room that the new volunteers were much more comfortable. They had more. They were more confident in their abilities for future calls. Like I said, the primary difficulty I experienced was encouraging everyone to share and reassuring that sharing was an important part of the process. In the future, I feel that the meetings could be more condensed, but I also felt like the level of discomfort in the new volunteers was pretty high. But in the future, I feel like the volunteers will dictate the length of these sub meetings, if you will. Um, and well, as this type of meeting is not a typical one for our chapter, it was a bit of an experiment. It did open my eyes to the need of such a meeting, and I will be implementing new volunteer meetings on a more regular basis, um, in conjunction with our mandatory monthly meetings, for the group as a whole. Um, and hopefully, and I've also realized that I do need to address the entire large group about the us we mentality that seems to have emerged, where, as I was stating earlier, the veteran volunteers seem to get bored, or exasperated, by how some of the newer volunteers are feeling. Now, and as a final thought, my co-leader and I have also even discussed creating a mentor-mentee system for our volunteers, where the veterans are paired with newer individuals, kind of like I guess, like a sponsor type situation that is common in like NA or AA. Thank you for your attention. I appreciate it. And again, thank you very much.